Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Mark Roberti, and this is the podcast for entrepreneurs who are looking for the breakthrough for their businesses. One of the best ways to tap into opportunities is to show up and start networking. Networking is a really important skill to make all these new connections and expand your presence. But in order to get all these benefits, we need to become effective networkers and also show up. And that's going to be the focus of this episode. Today's guest is an international performer, an innovative educator, and author of the Amazon best-selling book, Show Up, Unlocking the Power of Relational Networking. He is currently the founder and executive director of Revolution of Hope, an arts for social change initiative based in Boston, whose flagship program is the Roxbury Youth Orchestra. He was recently named a top 40 Urban Innovator Under 40 in the United States and a top 100 most influential people of color in Boston. In 2009, he became the Concertmaster of the first orchestra auditioned on the internet, the YouTube Symphony. Today's guest for episode 142 of the Breakthrough Success Podcast is none other than David France. David, it is such a pleasure to have you on the show.
Mark, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be a guest on your show. It's exciting.
I'm really excited to get into this one. Thank you for the warm words to get this episode on the road. But one of the things that I want to get established before we go into showing up and networking is the backstory. So I'm wondering if you could tell us why you decided to write the book Show Up.
Yeah, so the book Show Up, it kind of started as a dare. So this summer, I bought a one-way ticket to Barcelona, and I was traveling around Europe because I was also invited to help start a entrepreneurial incubator in the country of Cyprus. So I thought, if I'm going to go to Cyprus, might as well spend the whole summer in Europe. So bought a one-way ticket to Europe, went to Cyprus, and while I was in Cyprus, while I was just in Europe, I was posting just my journey of the people I met and my experiences. And one of my friends, he was going to be running a weekend mastermind, and he needed someone to come and talk about how do you build relationships. And he was following my journey in the summer while I was in Slovenia and while I was in Croatia, meeting all these people. And he thought, wait a minute, I should bring David back from Europe and have him come and do a weekend workshop mastermind on relationship building. So we had a Skype call while I was in Croatia last summer, and he said, can you come back to the United States and do this workshop? And so I said, yeah. So while I was away in Europe, I wrote a 20-page outline for this 3-hour workshop on relationship building, flew to Iowa for the mastermind, and the mastermind was a hit. People were in tears. I think I was in tears. It was really amazing. And my friend, Brandon Adams, who put on the mastermind, he said, David, if you could turn this workshop on relationship building into a book by December in hard copy, paperback form, you can be the opening keynote speaker for our conference in Los Angeles. And so I said, all right, see you in LA with a book.
And I mean, it's interesting how this wasn't like you had this burning desire to become an author like many years and then you finally write your book. It's something that just came up. It's basically how a lot of opportunities come to us. We don't plan for them, but they just happen. And part of being able to take advantage of these opportunities that just come at us is the ability to talk about ourselves, not in ego-based way, but the ability to convey yourself to someone who has no idea who you are. But I feel like the ego point I bring up, I feel like some people, they either don't think about it at all, or there are people who they think anything good that they say about themselves can come off as ego. So I'm wondering, with these networking events, how do we get better at talking about ourselves and what we do?
Well, honestly, when I moved to Boston and I went to my first networking event, my goal was to spend the entire time, I think it was a 3-hour event, and my goal was to spend the entire time actually not talking about myself and just listening. And so for 3 hours, I met so many people, and all I did was just listen to see what they did. And I found that I learned so much. And I think a lot of times when people are kind of thinking, hey, what's the best strategy for networking? I think maybe the best strategy is to listen, because when we listen to others, then that actually, one, we learn, but also it also makes us more intriguing, and people start asking questions about us. And so it becomes more natural and more authentic rather than a sales pitch.
Oh, I see it. So like you're saying that you listen to the person talking, and then they ask you questions. You hope they get to that point where they ask you questions, and then you talk about yourself. But it's like they gave you permission to talk about yourself. So I do find that interesting. But is there a point where like you're doing a lot of listening, but do you do talking at a certain point? Like someone's like says something that goes up your alley, like let's say you have a social media service and the person's like, we could really use help with social media, then you like maybe interject with that. So are there any points where you'll talk in the conversation and not just listen?
Well, of course. Well, and that was just the first event. But when I've gone to future events, I think for me with networking, I found that connecting with people who have the same values that I do, or who I just authentically connect with. And so by asking questions, you can kind of learn about who they are, where they're coming from, what are they passionate about, what are they trying to accomplish in the world. And I think the questions that we ask them then kind of really opens up our values, because the questions we ask come from a place of our own values. And I find that if there's something that I connect with the person on, then it makes sense to kind of say, hey, well, you do this. Well, I do this. How can I help you? And I feel like the next step beyond asking questions is providing value. So when I can find out about what someone's up to, and I can find out in what ways from my perspective and from my basket of resources can I add value to them, that would be the next stage that I try to go to, is not necessarily marketing myself, but I guess if I'm adding value, then I'm actually marketing myself as being able to add value in that particular way.
And I really like that idea of listening, and then when you figure out like the more you listen, the more you're able to provide value. I mean, this is similar to how like a content creator, for instance, when you're creating content and you see your audiences really engaging with some of your content, like that's a sign to create more of that content. So if you do more listening, you're able to provide better solutions. You're able to provide more value to the people who you're helping. But it doesn't matter how much value you provide if you're providing that value to the wrong person or the wrong group of people. So how do we make sure that we meet the right people who, as you mentioned before, align with our values, or could be a potential customer, or could be someone who it's beneficial for both of us to be in our networks?
Yeah, I think it's a patience game, and that's one of the things I talk about in my book, Show Up. I think if we are forming authentic connections with people that we naturally get along with, then I think time will tell whether it makes sense for both parties to enter into a business relationship. Because I think the more we can find out about the person, get to know the person, even do some online research, or just asking more questions, or just hanging out, or just showing up at their business and seeing what they're doing, I think the more kind of reconnaissance mission that we can do into their life and into their work will really kind of reveal if it makes sense to continue to work together or move forward in that process.
And one of the important things you mentioned was that whole idea of showing up, which is like, show up is the title of the book. It centralizes the message that you do need to show up to get these results. And someone like yourself, and you've shown up, you've done a lot of networking. That like the next networking event you go to, or whatever opportunity comes, like you have a good foundation already. You've had successes already. You've been able to make connections. But what about that person listening to this right now who may not have had as much experience in as much success, or they may be going to their very first networking event. And this idea of showing up, it's easier when you've experienced success, but how do we get better at showing up even if we haven't experienced any success yet?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think part of it is just putting your first foot forward, and just going to an event and just meeting people. And also the idea, one of the things that I've learned in my life is, so I'm a violinist, and as a musician, one of the things I've had to learn how to do is how to embrace failure and move on beyond failure. And so if you go to an event and you meet someone and maybe that conversation doesn't work out, how do you continue to keep going and meeting new people and asking new people questions? And so I think it's just starting, putting your foot forward, going to an event, meeting people, and not being really stressed about finding that perfect person. I really feel like the magic in a networking event is when everyone there is trying to become the person they hope to meet.
I'm trying to think that through. Can you say that last sentence again? Like, I'm just trying to process.
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
It sounded powerful. I just want to fully get that.
Yeah. I think the power the most powerful events, conferences, networking events that I've ever been to is when a majority of the people in the room are trying to embody the characteristics of the types of people they hope to meet. So if we can focus on becoming who we hope to meet, if then we become a magnet. We become this magnetic force that draws those people to us, because in any room there are people who want to meet other people, but then there are other people who want to be met, and if we can really be really self-aware of when, let's say we're in a room and we want to meet people, who are the types of people we want to meet? If we can kind of think about who are those people and then become those people, then those people who are looking for that kind of person, they will be drawn to us.
That is really deep, and I see that now. I mean, I love that magnet idea where, you take these personalities, these characteristics of someone who you hope to meet, and you embody them, and now all of a sudden you're going to attract that. And that's similar to how if you act based upon your values, you're going to attract people who have those similar types of values. And as we do continue to show up again and again, we're going to set goals for ourselves. And I know that a lot of us already set goals for ourselves, some of them big, some of them on the verge of becoming something really big. But not all of us have accomplished our goals yet. And our definition of the goal or unlocking potential, it's a moving target that changes based on our progress. But David, I'm wondering, what do you believe holds most people back from reaching their full potential?
Well, that's a really good question. I think what holds most people back is a fear of taking a risk, and because I think we live in a culture. Let's say when you turn on the news, most of the stories, if not every story, is about the most horrifying or negative thing that has happened in the city or the country, and so I feel like there's a culture of fear of taking risks, and I think if we can just kind of step into that unknown and embrace failure, that, okay, I'm going to take a risk. It might work. It might not work. I really believe that there's so much magic there. So I'll tell you a story. So I graduated from the New England Conservatory of Music a number of years ago, and I went on a musical tour. I'm a violinist. Went on a tour to Poland, and the tour was 3 weeks. And at the end of the tour, the 49 other musicians, they flew back to the United States out of Berlin, back to the United States. But before the tour started, I asked the tour director to fly me not out of Berlin, but fly me out of London back to the United States, and 3 weeks after the tour ended. And so I walk out of this fancy hotel with 49 other members. They board planes back to the United States, and I say goodbye. And because my flight's out of London, and I have now 3 weeks to get from Berlin to London. But the thing is, I had no money. I had just graduated and I was on a full scholarship. They paid my rent, paid my food. And so when I was on this musical tour and this tour ended, I had no money. I just had a violin and a dream. So that was a big risk. How do I get from Berlin to London with no money? And I did. I was busking. I was playing music on the streets. I was meeting people. It was really amazing. But when I got to London and I came back to the United States, I learned three really big lessons. That one, you don't need a lot of stuff to travel. You don't need a lot of money to travel. And if you take a leap of faith, a great adventure could await you. And those three lessons, that kind of don't need a lot of stuff, don't need a lot of money, and risk taking, leading to really big adventures, has really been the fuel that's really ignited me on this journey that I'm on right now.
David, thank you for sharing those valuable lessons. And I mean, going from Berlin to London in 3 weeks, like before, like you obviously did, you're able to talk about it. You're able to say like, I did all these things, and then I was able to make that happen. But there was a point there where you probably had no idea how it was even possible. So, and I feel like, and I'm sure there was a point where like you weren't sure how you were going to get there. So, yes, you could talk about it like, okay, I did all these different things. This is how it happened. But I feel like very similar to your situation, there are people who they're setting goals for themselves right now, and they feel like it's a monumental goal. Like in your case, going from Berlin to London in 3 weeks, and you have no money in your pockets right now. People are setting those types of goals for themselves where they set this goal, they give themselves this, they have no idea how it's going to happen. So how did you go from being in Berlin, no money in your pocket, to not being like, oh, boo-hoo, poor me, and like actually making it happen and finding yourself in London?
Yeah. So I think it really starts with just setting really small goals, small manageable goals, because I really believe that when you have small manageable goals and you see that either you're successful or you failed, but you're still alive and you can keep going, it's those small milestones that can keep you going and then become the fuel for the next bigger risk.
I also use that idea of like that small milestone, because you could set a big goal, but if you like that big goal, it's going to take a while for you to get it done. So those small milestones give you a sense of accomplishment. They give you a sense that you're definitely getting closer to that big goal that you do set for yourself. And one of the things that I do to help myself accomplish the goal that I'm going after is I like to consume a lot of content that I know will give me the knowledge to help me get there. And one of my favorite forms of content consumption is reading books. So, David, I'm wondering if you could share with us 3 great books that you can think of that you believe would have a positive impact on us.
One of the books that I love is a book called The Talent Code by Daniel Coyle. And in that book, he talks about basically how talent isn't born, it's grown. And it's one of the books that really talks about the idea of 10,000 hours towards mastery of any concept. And so that's one of the books that's really kind of given me the kind of mindset for what is it going to take to become world class at anything, 10,000 hours. The second book is a book, as I love the Bible in a sense. And so just having a book where in that can give you a worldview or a worldview of understanding where did we come from, what is life about, and where are we going. It's like some book that can give meaning to your life and for what anything is about. And then I would say any book by Simon Sinek, because that's just in the same kind of vein of Simon Sinek writes a lot about knowing why you do things. And so he really talks about people don't really buy what you do, but they buy why you do it. And so I would say those 3 books, The Talent Code, the Bible, and anything by Simon Sinek. So basically it's something that undergirds your work ethic, something that undergirds the philosophy for your life, and then something that really gives you a why, a meaning towards everything else that you're going to do in the future.
David, thank you for those great book recommendations. Those books and the show notes will be over at markbirdie.com/E142. And If you want a free audiobook, Audible is offering Breakthrough Success listeners a free audiobook over at markgabirdi.com/audible. That will also be in the show notes. And before we wrap up this episode, I would like to flip the tables a little bit. So, David, I've asked you a few questions throughout our time together, but what do you believe is one question that we need to be asking ourselves more often?
Yeah, I think a question that we should ask ourselves more is who are we? So a couple years ago, I was lost in Brussels. And while I was lost in Brussels, I came upon a violin shop. And when I walked into the violin shop, there was a violin maker, and he was making violins, and that kind of made sense. But before I walked up to him, he moved to another counter, and he starts serving coffee. And so I thought, okay, what is this? So I walk up to the violin maker, and he says, okay, this is a violin shop and a coffee shop. And he proceeded to tell me that as a violin maker, he was really a social guy, and making violins was very lonely. So he built a coffee shop onto his violin making studio. And so that violin maker in Brussels, he found a solution that was at the unique intersection of who he is. And I think we can all do that. So I think the more we can really ask questions about who am I, then I think we can find what our unique intersection is. And that will really give us the fuel to what we produce in the world and in our lives.
David, thank you for giving us that great question. I believe we ask ourselves that question, we learn more about ourselves, and that helps us to be more creative and pursue bigger goals and get them accomplished. And thank you for sharing all of your insights throughout our time together. Breakthrough Success listeners, if you guys want to learn more about David, you can head over to his site, davidfranceviolin.com. And don't forget to get his new book, Show Up, Unlocking the Power of Relational Networking. That book is on Amazon, and that will also be in the show notes. David, I cannot thank you enough for sharing all of your great insights with us. It was such a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Mark. It was a pleasure.
How does over 100 retweets per day sound to you? My free ebook, 27 Ways to Get More Retweets on Twitter, has you covered. I use the methods within this ebook to get over 10,000 retweets every single quarter. To learn more and get access to this free resource, visit markgabirdi.com/